as countries around the world continue to take away the rights of women. Sometimes slowly, sometimes in the blink of an eye. Shirin Ebadi, the first Muslim woman to ever win the Nobel Peace Prize, continues to fight for justice. This is a story about how quickly things can change, how fragile democracy and human freedom can be. This is a cautionary tale about one woman's struggle to restore the rights that women have lost. The women of Iran, the women of the world. Shirin Ebadi, Until We Are Free.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We're so glad to have you here, and thanks for your patience this morning as we dealt with our continuing world of Zoom and technology. We appreciate you for joining us. My name is Lauren Cafaro. I am the Director of Global Programs for the Peace Jam Foundation, and that was a trailer for Peace Jam's newest documentary, Shirin Ebadi, Until We Are Free, which tells the story of the history of Iran's struggle for democracy and the work of this extraordinary woman who we'll be with today. This context of what brings us together today in dialogue with her could not be more urgent. And I want to share a brief outtake as reported yesterday by Newsweek. I quote, "Iran has been experiencing unprecedented levels of protests and civil unrest since the death of Mahsa Amini on September 16th. The 22-year-old Kurdish woman was arrested by the country's morality police for supposedly wearing improper form of hijab during a visit to Tehran and allegedly beaten severely while in custody. Iranian lawmakers have in recent days called for strict punishments for the protesters who have been arrested. On Monday, CNN reported that a letter signed by 227 members of the Iranian parliament urged that the protesters be given harsh punishment that would serve as a good lesson in the shortest possible time. Just yesterday, Iranian parliament voted to sentence the first protester to death. The reason for this dialogue and why we are here today is because Peace Jam believes the world needs to know the story of Iran to raise global awareness for the cause of these women and their allies. Only with awareness can we move forward into support, advocacy, and action. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Sarah Belhay. Based in the UK, Sarah is a longstanding member of Peace Jam's community. Currently, Sarah is the Policy and Projects Manager at the EY Foundation, advocating to improve employment prospects for young people experiencing disadvantage. Thanks, Sarah, for joining us.
Thanks, Lauren, and thanks, Peace Jam, and to everyone tuning in for this really timely session. So we are honored to have Shirin Ebadi with us today to translate. Shirin Ebadi is a renowned lawyer who went to law school with Shirin Ebadi in Iran back in the late 1960s before the Cultural Revolution. She was a senior advisor to the film Until We Are Free. Thank you so much for being with us today. And now, of course, I'd like to take a moment to introduce our special guest, Nobel Peace Prize winner Shirin Ebadi. Dr. Ebadi was born in Iran in 1947 to parents who believed in equality and justice, raising their sons and daughter as equals, setting the foundation for Dr. Ebadi's life and work. Shirin went on to study law, and in March 1969, when Dr. Ebadi was only 22 years old, she became the first female judge in Iran. She continued her education and received a doctorate in law from Tehran University in 1971. In the 1970s, Iran was in a state of unrest. Iran was a monarchy, and the ruler, the Shah, was an unpopular dictator. In 1979, the Shah was overthrown. Instead of a democracy, as many had fought for, a religious government came to power in Iran. The new government was headed by Islamic clerics, led by the chief cleric, the Ayatollah. they believed in a government in which women and minorities did not have equal rights. One of the first policies they enforced was to take away rights for women. It was no longer legal for women to serve as judges. All female judges were dismissed from their posts and given clerical jobs. Dr. Ebadi, outraged by the situation, requested an early retirement. For several years, she stayed at home taking care of her two daughters, writing books, and working to get her job back. In 1992, Dr. Ebadi acquired her lawyer's license and established her own practice. She prioritized cases that involved the unfair treatment of women and children. Shirin became one of the most well-known lawyers in Iran and defended the families of serial murder victims and child abuse victims. In 2004, Shirin Ebadi was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. She has lived in exile in the United Kingdom since June 2009 because of death threats from the Iranian government. She continues to work for human rights around the world via her foundation, and she's been a member of the Peace Jam Foundation since 2004. On a personal note, Shirin Ebadi was the first Nobel Peace Prize winner I heard at a Peace Jam Youth Leadership Conference back in 2014. And that experience inspired me to pursue further education in human rights. So it's truly an honor to be with you again today. And now I'm sure everyone would be delighted to hear a few opening words from you, Shirin. So I'll pass it over to you. I'm delighted if Shirin could open up today's session with some opening words, just to set the scene, and then we'll ask some questions. Thank you.
Done. Welcome to all of the participants in this program who can watch me now. One of my friends who is the founder of Peace Jam, she has produced and directed this film, Until We're Free, and I want to thank her. And you heard Lauren and Sarah. As you heard, there is a revolution going on in Iran right now. Because it started with this young woman who had not totally covered her hair. And this resulted in all of the people of Iran rising up. It's like a match that set fire to gasoline. That's how I feel it's working now. For years and years, people had adhered to these discriminatory laws that were against women. So at this time, it's not only women who object to that, but men and women. Men are supporting women. And at this time, everyone has the same demand. And their demand is that the Islamic Republic has to leave. And that's why the motto is woman, life, freedom. What this means is that we need a secular democratic society to be able to bring into effect this motto. This is the third month that people have taken to the streets. And they repeat the same motto, which indicates that they are tired of religious dictatorship. And they want a secular democratic society. They want a government where women have equal rights. In a democratic government where the dignity of human beings and their lives are guaranteed, and freedom for all. The people of Iran have lost many, unfortunately, during this period. But they're not going back home. And what they're asking is that the regime has to fall. And there are people on the streets from every age, older, younger, women, men. But unfortunately, over 50 of the people who've been killed have been children under the age of 18. And many of the students in schools have been apprehended on the basis of the statistics that we have. Over 13,000 people have been arrested. And over 300 people have been killed. And these are horrible statistics because people are peaceful. They have taken to the streets peacefully. But the government has always been brutal, has arrested them and thrown them in prison. But when people unite, they will be victorious. So victory belongs to the people of Iran. And I'm sure that freedom will come to Iran.
Thank you so much for sharing those insights with us. Having watched the film, I think something that was really brought to light for myself was really seeing the journey that Iran has taken in terms of human rights and just how fragile human rights are. I'd like to remind the audience to please post your questions for Shirin either in the chat or in the Q&A. And whilst those are coming in, I'd like to pose the first question, which is how significant is it that women, and especially young women, are leading the protests that are happening across Iran right now?
This is very important because the government, since 1979, when they took power, has continued this discrimination and oppression against women. And during a very short period of time, women of Iran lost all of the rights that they had. At the beginning of the revolution, women always objected. But men did not support them. And there were no political parties that would support them. And they would say, do not object. We are fighting the world imperialism. Whenever we become victorious, then we'll talk about women's rights. And then after that, there was a war which continued for 8 years. And so every time women talked, they said that the country is in danger, that we're in a war. So don't say anything until we can run the enemy out. Of course, the war ended, but all of the political parties were shut down. Many, many people were arrested and killed. So being a socialist in Iran became a huge crime. And so a huge number of people were killed because of being socialists. This discrimination and oppression in a society is like a virus. Once it is imposed on one group of people, then it takes over. Because since this takes over, people shouldn't be silenced. And this is why at this time, men have joined women and support them. And now we can see that there are men and women maybe equal on the streets. And they are demanding democracy, which is the gate to women's rights. Therefore, now we're more powerful.
Thank you. It's really interesting to hear that shift in attitudes. And in the film, you say how your father was a feminist, as was your mother. But interesting to hear how, you know, perhaps the reason why there are more men supporting the protests is because there's this recognition that discrimination is a virus. In terms of the protests, we know that there have been widespread protests in Iran before. For example, the protests that occurred after the 2009 election. Do you think that the women-led protests that are happening in Iran right now are different? And if so, why?
In 2009, people protested fraud in elections. But at this time, they just don't want the regime any longer. This is why people who have tested in different ways whether reform would work have come to the conclusion that it doesn't. So in 2009, Tehran and 2 or 3 other cities joined the protests. But at this time, there are over 100 cities that have joined the protests. In 2009, after a few weeks of protesting, people went back home, meaning it didn't even take a month. But now we're in the third month of the protests. In 2009, people who had voted were after their votes, and they asked, "Where's my vote?" Whereas now, people who are not even eligible to vote, like 13, 14-year-olds, are on the streets. And as I told you, many have been arrested. But in 2009, this didn't happen. The reason that the high school students are on the street is because they know that they have no future in Iran. This is what they have heard from their parents and or their teachers. And of course, due to the internet and the fact that the teachers talk to them, they now know what's going on, and that's why they have joined the protest, because they know that if they get to age 20 or 30, there won't be any rights for them. Unfortunately, people are becoming poorer and poorer every day. And the rate of poverty is very high now in Iran. So a high school student does understand that even if that person goes to the university and graduates, they are not able to find a job. And pursuant to the UNESCO statistics, Iran has the worst brain drain. All of the young people are leaving the country, but they have to leave because they don't find jobs, but they have to stay. They have to take the country back from this government. So there are these differences between 2009 and 2022.
Thank you so much. And just hearing you talk, definitely it really resonated, that the reference to the appetite for change, but particularly among young people. And I think we're really seeing that in other movements, whether it be around gun violence in the US, or in terms of the climate change protests as well, that have been happening all over the world. And actually this segues nicely into our next question, which was submitted in advance by several members of our audience. What can we do to support Iran from abroad? And in particular, how can young people help?
قطع شدی. خب بگو شیرین جون. The most important thing that we want is for you to be the speaker for the people of Iran. Be a loudspeaker. unfortunately, up to now, people's voice were not heard. The media in America did not reflect the protests in Iran. Even right now, they don't. They don't write enough about it. So when we read the news or watch the news, we don't see that. So the most important thing that we want is that the news of Iran and whatever comes out of Iran to be brought to the people so that the whole world knows what the government is doing to peaceful people.
Thank you, Shirin. I think we've got time for one more question. In terms of human rights lawyers and their role in Iran for advocating change, what sort of role do you see them playing in terms of the protests? The protests who have been detained, are they receiving the opportunity to go to court to prove their innocence? What's the situation there?
شرایطشون چیه؟ When attorneys defend political and conscience prisoners, the prosecutor turns against them and tells them, oh, so you're thinking like them as well. And this results coming up with indictments and opening up cases, criminal cases, against the attorneys who defend human rights activists. And this is the same charge that was brought against me personally. The government used to say, why is it that all the families of political prisoners come to you? And why is it that you defend them pro bono? So this shows that you think like them as well. So why are you defending people who oppose us? But my argument was, what if I defend a thief? Do you think that I have committed theft as well? They would say no. So I would always ask, so why is it that you think that I'm a criminal too? Why is it that you bring charges against me? Just because I defend them. The reason that I work pro bono is because they don't have the money. So it's my duty to help people who are in prison as an attorney. But of course, the government did not accept my arguments. And that's why they created all these issues for me and threw me in prison. And resulted in my property being confiscated. And when I left Iran, instead of me, my spouse and my sister were thrown in prison. And the same things have happened for other attorneys. At the present time, approximately 15 of the prisoners are attorneys. They haven't committed a crime. They have just defended the political activists. And this situation results because the judiciary is not independent in Iran. And unfortunately, they are under the influence of the security authorities. And this is one of the gravest issues in Iran.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ebadi, for sharing your experiences and helping us understand the situation in Iran, and indeed the risk that protesters and human rights defenders are going through. It's truly remarkable, and definitely some key takeaways for the global community and our young peace jammers as well to take in terms of showing solidarity and being allies. Wonderful. So we've got time for one more question. What percentage of the Iranian population do you believe support the current leader and the situation as it stands in Iran?
The majority of the people and when I say the majority of the people, I mean over 80% of the people do not agree with this government. But let's remember that not 80% are on the streets. As we know, there are a lot of people who do not agree with the government, but they're silent. They're sitting at home. People who've taken to the streets, these are people who are active, and their numbers are high. Maybe we can say that's 10% of the people who have taken to the streets. But this doesn't mean that only 10% are against the government. I would say over 80% of the people are against the government, but they're silent. But the ones who don't go to the streets, they always leave the door to their homes open so that when the police attacks young people, they can go to the first house where the door is open and close it behind them. And this is why a lot of people leave the doors open. When they see people who are being hit or who are being shot by the government, they sometimes fight the government people or authorities by throwing stones at them. They go to the roofs and throw stones at them. And that's why I call these people the silent protesters. But we know that they're not happy with this government. If that were not the case, they wouldn't have left the door open so that people who are on the streets can go there.
Thank you so much, Shirin, for answering that question. So I believe Lauren is going to share a poster about how you yourselves can organize a community screening. I have to say I've read both of Shirin's books, and watching the film really brings the story to life. And I think in order to really truly appreciate the significance of what's happening in Iran today, understanding that historical context is so important. So we'd really recommend you watch the film and organize a community screening. I will now hand over to Lauren.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. And thanks for Dawn for joining. I'm sorry we weren't able to hear from our films director. However, I just wanted to share with you an amazing opportunity. This new feature film, documentary film, Shirin Ebadi, Until We Are Free, is a beautiful telling of the history of Iran and Shirin's struggle for democracy and human rights in the country, as well as the struggle of many thousands, tens of thousands of women in Iran that we hear about in the news today. And we would like to issue a call to action to each of you here on this call with us, and each person who is an ally of peace around the world, to watch the film, to share this film with people in your community, in your home. And we are offering right now the opportunity to do a free community screening of this film. We think it's critically important for people of all ages, from all walks of life around the world, to understand what's happening in Iran, to be able to support the fight for democracy there and the struggle of these women and their allies. And that's why we're offering the opportunity to host a free screening of this amazing feature-length film. I'm just showing our website, peacejam.org/films, and you can see this film has just premiered in Venice this year in September and has already won a slew of different awards, and we expect it to continue because it's a beautiful telling of the story of Shirin Ebadi. We'll be following up with information about how you can host a screening, and also sharing it in our YouTube link when we post this video online. So thank you so much, and we look forward to offering this opportunity for thousands of people around the world to see this film and know this story.
Thank you, Lauren. And just hearing you talk about the opportunity, I was reminded that Human Rights Day is coming up on the 10th of December. So this feels like a really great opportunity, not just to celebrate the advances that have been made in terms of progressing human rights, but also in terms of raising awareness about the work that still needs to be done. And screening this film is a great opportunity to do that. I'd like to say a massive thank you to both Shirin Ebadi for translating, and of course to Dr. Shirin Ebadi for your time today and really helping us understand the situation better. Really appreciate your time. If you'd like to share some closing remarks before we wrap up the event, that would be wonderful. So I'll pass back to you.
Women all over the world unfortunately are under discrimination, regardless of where they are. But sometimes it's harsher, sometimes it's weaker. In the Middle East, the situation is worse. But women have awakened. Look at the young girls in Afghanistan, how they're struggling and how they're fighting the Taliban. They are very courageous fighting the Taliban. In Iran, women have been fighting for 43 years until they achieved bringing men in support of them as well. Look at other countries. In many countries, look at Iraq, in Syria, in the Emirates, we have feminists all over. So maybe the next century is the century where there is no discrimination against women. We cannot accept that this century endorses discrimination. So it's the young people who are fighting for it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shirin Ebadi, for joining us today, Shirin Ershadi for translating, Sarah Belhay for being our beautiful moderator of this conversation, and to each of you who joined us today to be part of this important conversation. I hope you will share this message, what you heard and what you learned today, with people in your life and in your community. And we will be also sharing this video on our YouTube channel very soon, where you can share it around with all of your friends and family as we continue to advocate and support the women in Iran and their allies. I would like to, before we close, just issue an invitation to all of you to our next Peace Jam event coming up on December 9th. We'll be hosting our annual Billion Acts Awards. So please save the date and stay tuned to our social media channels for the chance to register to join us live, where we'll be awarding 6 outstanding young people who are working for peace in their communities around the world with this award and this fellowship to help amplify and celebrate the positive change they're making in their communities. We hope to see you there. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today, and take care.